Are you quick to pop off at the mouth in a disagreement? Do you say things in the heat of the moment that you later regret and you wish you had the tools to handle conflict with more ease and more grace? Well, that's what we're talking about in today's episode of The Secret Formula of Femininity. Stay tuned. Welcome to The Secret Formula of Femininity for women who want to live a more feminine, fun, and fabulous life. I'm Dr. Nicole Montero, your host on this weekly journey to unlocking your inner radiance, nurturing fulfilling relationships, and becoming the best version of yourself. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. I'm Dr. Nicole, your host on this journey to tapping into your feminine essence. And this is something that I could not wait to talk about because I hear so many women say, Doc, I pop off at the mouth. I'm quick to go from 0 to 10 without warning. Later on, I regret how intense I got in conflict, and I want to find a way to handle it better. So, this is what we're going to talk about. And of course, you know, I love to start with story time. This time, I'm going to start with myself. Like many women, I'm not going to say every woman, but like most women, right? When it's in the heat of the moment, a conflict, a disagreement with your partner, with your spouse, especially when it's about a topic that you're passionate about or something that hits home, you can really start to get in your feelings, and that can cloud your judgment and how you handle the conflict. So, you know, that like many couples, my husband and I had a disagreement about something. And I remember specifically the time that I shifted from a mode of getting easily offended, taking things personally, which would then make me lose, kind of lose my emotional center and I would overreact. And I'm not a person that's really loud and boisterous, but being in that defensive mode, it will make you say things with a tone or say things that don't really capture what you really feel because you're more coming from a hurt place. So I remember one particular disagreement. I don't even remember exactly what it was about, right? Because disagreements are normal. But I remember the time, and I remember consciously in my mind saying, okay, Nicole, what you're going to do is you're going to pause. You're not going to talk. You're going to listen, no matter how much you want to jump in and feel like you want to defend yourself because you feel like, you're being misunderstood. I just talked myself down and I was like, you're going to stop. You're not going to say anything. Even when it's your time to speak, you're going to be a little more reflective. And by me telling myself that, it actually calmed my body. Like I felt that heat in my body, right? Usually, ladies, it's that heat that makes us want to we take it personally and we want to defend ourselves. I felt that heat going down. I started feeling calmer just from the self-talk that I was telling myself. And I remember making a conscious decision not to take it personally. And what that did is it made me less defensive. And it's almost like the logical part of my brain, right? That prefrontal cortex, it just opened up. And I was able to kind of step back outside of myself. And then I engaged in a much more easy conversation, graceful conversation. It wasn't that we totally agreed, but I was able to express myself outside of emotion. I wasn't coming from a place of being triggered, so to speak, right? So I had decided I'm not going to be defensive. I'm going to listen. And it was so powerful. And what happened from there is I was able to use all of the tools of feminine communication. I was able to be in a mode of receiving what he was saying to me. I was able to be in the mode of using the best words, so using my powerful communication skills. And I was able to couch things in a way where I took ownership. I used I statements, right? But it all started with a conscious decision to not do things, the old way. And it wasn't that I was too off the hook, right? Like I've worked with a lot of women and there's a whole range. Some of us pop off at the mouth real quick. Some of us, it's a little more subtle, and I was more on the subtle side. But either way, the damage is done when you're overly defensive. And that was the turning point. I decided I am not going to take this personally. And we're going to get into that in a little bit because in my coaching programs and with my coaching clients, I teach them a formula called the P2 formula. And the first P is learning to not take it personally. Whatever the disagreement, whatever the argument, whatever the conflict, you're going to be in a better place if you learn to not take it personally. And so deciding that was a turning point for me. And it kind of also reinforced for me that connection between your thoughts and your feelings. And if you can change your thoughts about a situation, and if you can be conscious, intentional about changing your perception, that can change how you feel, what you even your physical reactions, those automatic triggers that come up for us physically, and then it can change your reactions. So that was a really, really powerful shift. And I've been able to kind of parcel out or break down all of the elements of graceful feminine conflict resolution that can be really helpful in relationships. All right, so let's talk about conflicts in relationships. A lot of us have a negative connotation or a negative view of conflicts, but actually, they're inevitable. Disagreements are inevitable. You're talking about two different people, and anytime you have two people, it's almost like you have two cultures. You're blending cultures, you're blending viewpoints and worldviews, and no matter how similar you are, your upbringing, how you interacted with your parents, with your friends, other family members, all of those things affect how you view conflict and discussion and disagreements. So it's always going to be a difference. You're never going to be on the same page. And even couples that say that they don't argue, like they're either pushing it down or um they may not be arguing, but they do have disagreements, and maybe they have a healthier way besides arguing, right? So it depends on the couple. Arguing is not inherently bad. You just have to know how to fight fair. And then there's other ways to deal with disagreements, but the key is that you don't avoid it completely or try to suppress these differences, right? And actually, conflict can be, or disagreement can be, a great opportunity for growth and deeper understanding, because a lot of times we don't talk about things until they come to a head, almost like a pimple. Until you have all that oil underneath boiling up, and until that pimple comes to a head, you can't get all the stuff out, right? And I know you're not supposed to squeeze a pimple because it's going to leave a scar. So you have to know the right way to get that oil and all that gush out. And this is the same thing with conflict, right? The key, though, to healthy disagreement and conflict that you can grow from is avoiding reacting in the heat of the moment, because you want to avoid coming across as harsh or defensive. Defensiveness, and I've said it in many different episodes and contexts, it is the death knell, right? Like it really makes it hard to have a conversation. And think about anybody that you've talked to, right? And I try to practice this with my kids, even my daughters. I'm like, all right, am I being defensive? Am I overreacting as a mom? It's important for me to set an atmosphere where they don't feel like what they say is going to upset me or make me be on the defense, because then they're going to avoid it, right? The other thing is, you want to think about, for us as ladies, we want to embrace our feminine energy, that part of us that can be nurturing, that can be receptive, that can be empathic. That is a very powerful set of communication skills, especially in the heat of disagreement. If you can learn to not overreact, if you can learn to not be defensive, and if you can learn to really try to hear what the other person is saying, you're even modeling, right? Sometimes it doesn't mean, like, most people don't come into a relationship with perfect communication. No matter how they grew up, right? It's just hard to interact and connect with someone and have this perfect communication. But when you practice skills on your end, you're modeling for your spouse how they can do it, and they feel good when you display these qualities it can model for them the same thing, right? I want you to keep in mind too that feminine communication is not about weakness. I think that's a misnomer, and you can use these, or that's a misconception. You can use these skills even outside of your relationship. It doesn't make you weak to not be reactive. Actually, being overly reactive, especially out in the world, it's more of a sign of weakness. It's like you can't control your emotions. You don't have the emotional intelligence to be aware and be able to have some control over yourself. So, feminine communication is not about being weak, it's about creating a space, especially in your relationship, for more understanding and resolution. And I want to kind of dispel this myth that you can get rid of all disagreement, that just by talking, all disagreements are just going to disappear. Part of being in a relationship is learning to choose your battles. There's some research that says almost 70%, so about 69% of disagreements with married couples are intractable, meaning they're never going to be solved. It doesn't matter how much therapy, how much talking, how much you do. Certain disagreements or key issues that come up are just never going to completely disappear. But what that means, and when I tell that to some people, they're like, what? Oh my God, that's horrible, right? That doesn't mean you throw out your spouse now and you look for a new one. What it means is it's the saying of agreeing to respectfully agreeing to disagree. When you have two people with two different personalities, there are going to be things that you do differently. Sometimes the same thing that drew you to that person initially can be the thing after years and years that drives you crazy. That person isn't going to change. In any fundamental way. You may not change in any fundamental way as far as who you are, but what you can do is change how you perceive those differences and disagreements and how you react to them. All right. So it's a matter of what is your goal with disagreements? Is your goal to completely have it be wiped out and everything is perfect all the time? Or is it knowing how to have a healthy perspective on it and how to react or how to interact or communicate in the midst of some of the most, intense or the most serious of those disagreements or conflicts? The latter, that is the key, right? You want to understand how to approach it, how to perceive it, and how to have control over yourself. That's the key thing right there. So there are a lot of challenges, right? It doesn't matter how much I spin it and talk about the how healthy conflict is, how important it is to acknowledge conflict, to not avoid it. There are some challenges with it, especially that we face as women. And men have their own challenges, right? There is a way of them being able to contain their masculine energy, and when they're interacting with their spouse, to not bring in an overly defensive masculine energy as if they're out, fighting the tigers and protecting, right? They have to understand the difference between conflict outside, that is where you have to protect yourself and be in protective mode, and that has more aggression to it, and conflict within the relationship where a softer approach is necessary. But for us as women, a lot of times, especially if we did not see healthy conflict growing up, and I'm running into women more and more where they didn't grow up seeing a healthy family. They have, a broken home, so to speak. They didn't have a two parent or two caretaker household. They didn't have extended family members that were married and were committed to each other. They didn't see it. They may have either seen just their mom being raised by their mom, so they never saw what it was like for her to interact with a partner, or they may have seen a toxic or unhealthy marriage where a relationship where it was always bickering, fighting, even abuse within the relationship. And so they want to avoid that at all costs. In both cases, if they never saw any male female interaction or if it was very toxic, They try to find any way to avoid feeling like they're being taken advantage of, feeling like they're not valued, not respected in a relationship. And rightfully so, right? That their stance is like, I don't want to walk into something. I want to take precautions. I don't want to be hurt like that. But what can happen is they become overly avoidant. They never learn the skills of healthy communication. And so they just avoid getting close, being vulnerable, learning those other skills. They're just in protective mode. It's interesting because I heard an interview with Rihanna, the singer Rihanna, and she talked about how, and we all know what happened with her and Chris Brown years ago, but she talked about growing up in a household where her parents constantly argued to the point where she had migraine headaches, like very, very serious headaches from the stress of it all. And we know that migraines and other like chronic pain conditions like that, they can result from unhealthy, toxic family situations. She said their arguments and just the toxicity was so intense that she wanted to get out of it. And it's interesting, a lot of times when we're in those situations, we want, as soon as we're like of age, we want to get out of it. But sometimes we find ourselves back with people who are also unhealthy or don't know how to communicate or are abusive. So I love that she was able to reflect on that. And if this is you, like, think about it. What did you grow up seeing? Did you not see any relationship communication at all? Because that's one of the things when you grow up in a single parent household, you don't see the balance. Okay. Or did you see a household where it was so toxic, or there was a co parenting situation where they couldn't get along and it was like either extreme arguments and disrespect or just complete shut down, shut out, no communication? So, those are things for you to think about. And some of the challenges that I see, there are three main challenges are emotional reactivity, fear of being seen as weak, and avoiding conflict. All right, so let's start with the first one. A lot of times we can get very reactive. That's that whole 0 to 100 in less than a second. We get caught up in our feelings and react without thinking. That's the whole learn how to respond and not react. So when we react, it's easy to snap back and say things that we don't really mean. It's really coming from, it's almost like an instinct, right? We get in protective mode because we're triggered and we say things without thinking. Emotions are high, it clouds our judgment. And in those moments, it's really important to use the power of the pause, stepping back, taking a deep breath, knowing that it's not life or death. You don't have to respond in that moment. That helps to bring the emotional level or intensity down a little bit. So, that is one of the key things, that emotional reactivity. The other challenge that I see with a lot of women is fear of being seen weak, a fear of being seen as weak. That can come from being raised to be overly independent, strong and independent. And so weakness is seen as something that could really damage you. It's not just seen as weakness, but it's seen as something that can put you in harm's way. So there's a very extreme view of like having to be strong. And so sometimes we fear that if we soften our approach, if we look at the big picture, if we want to, look at the whole war, not just one battle. You know how they say you can win a battle and lose the war, right? Softening our approach is looking at the big picture. But for some people, they're afraid to look weak in any instance. And here's the thing though, your true strength lies in being able to be more grounded and composed, not be controlled by your emotions. And when tensions are high, softer communication can be is a strong strategy because it changes the whole energy and the whole atmosphere. It doesn't mean you're a pushover because you're not letting your buttons be pushed. And this is also important for people who are in toxic relationships. You hear a lot about people saying they've been with narcissists or people with narcissistic tendencies. And one thing that manipulative or exploitative people try to do is push your buttons. And so if you can learn that control and you can learn to not fear being seen as weak, but to be able to use the best strategy, that's actually going to put you in a better position. Again, the key is emotional intelligence. Having the emotional intelligence to be aware of your emotions, the other person's, how you perceive their emotions, and making the best decision. The third challenge is avoiding conflict. So, like I said, if you didn't see conflict or you saw intense conflict, then a lot of times you're just going to avoid it. There's a tendency to avoid the discomfort of having to confront someone or having to share your feelings and not know how they're going to be received. There's a lot of discomfort that comes with that. And most of us shy away from discomfort. So we don't want to rock the boat. We don't want to bring up unresolved issues from our own childhood or within the relationship. Sometimes we just, put a band-aid or on something, turn a blind eye, and we never really resolve it. So we're afraid of anything that's going to rip that band-aid off or rock the boat. But what can happen, the downside of that is it builds resentment. And resentment, I've said it over and over, resentment, it eats away at you. Guilt is a healthier or easier emotion to kind of deal with. Resentment is like a virus that just lies beneath the surface and it just explodes when you least expect it. So if you have a bunch of pent up resentment, whenever there is a conflict, that tends to get triggered and it comes up, and then that also contributes to saying things that you really don't mean or saying it in a way that you don't mean. It's better to say something, express yourself, be more in touch with your authentic feelings, even if you make some missteps and feel a little guilty, and you can come back and talk about it. You can apologize. But when you let that resentment simmer, it's hard to even have it, almost shuts down the empathy and compassion that you can have for the other person. So those are the three main challenges that a lot of women have to being able to have healthy disagreement and handle it using their feminine communication skills. So you want to keep those in mind. So I want to share a few tips about how to actually use your feminine grace and ease and elegant communication skills to be able to manage or resolve conflict. So these strategies are actually pretty practical. You can start implementing them right away. You don't even have to wait until there is conflict. These are things that you can use to help you to feel more, have more emotional control. Our emotions are powerful, but we have to learn how to use them more effectively versus letting them run the show, right? They should not be the captain of the ship. They should be a gauge, almost like a compass, a GPS, but they don't have to run the show all the time. So one is learning to stay calm and centered. When there is conflict, and this is something that you even want to practice when there isn't conflict, right? How do you calm yourself? How can you stay centered? How can you soothe yourself? Because usually when we go from 0 to 100 like that, it's because there's something stirring at us, and almost like in our core, in our gut, that we feel we're not at ease. And so we lash out. So learning to stay calm and centered. The breath is the best way to do it. There's a biochemical reaction when you take a deep breath. It helps to calm the parasympathetic nervous system. So the sympathetic nervous system is almost like it protects us, it gets us all activated. The parasympathetic nervous system helps to bring us back to a state of balance and calm us. So a deep breath can be really, really powerful. That's why a lot of times you might hear people sigh, like, when you're just going through a lot. That's your body's way of bringing in that breath, right? It's getting you centered, even through a sigh, through just a collective breath. and learn to collect your thoughts. Like, be in touch with what are you actually thinking? Are you thinking that your partner is doing something to hurt you? He's not, listening to you. If you have these thoughts, it's going to lead to feelings of, I need to protect myself. So just try to take a step back and collect your thoughts, and just even ground yourself in a way of being in the present. Feel yourself where you're sitting, where you're standing. Be in touch with something that you see. The 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 grounding approach, where you think of 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things you can smell, a taste that you might, imagine what you can feel, 2 things you can feel. This helps you to stay grounded. You don't have to do all of those, but just pick one thing that keeps you in the present. Like, is it something that you see around you, a color, a pattern, something that you can focus on that keeps you in the present? The next thing is to use soft communication. Instead of raising your voice, be conscious of like your tone of voice. We all know that if you have kids or you've dealt with kids, you know the power of your tone of voice. When you raise it, when you use certain inflections, it communicates certain things. Well, it's the same thing in your relationship. You want to be mindful though, in conflict, it's better to use a softer communication. It's better to try to express how you feel in softer ways so it doesn't come out as harshly, because when it's very harsh, that signals to the other person that they need to be in protective mode. All right. You can use I statements. I feel hurt when. So you want to couple I statements with feeling words. Instead of attacking, you always do this, I can't believe you did that, right? Use the I statements and use your feelings. That way, when you're using your experience, what you're saying is, I'm taking ownership for what I'm feeling and I'm trying to communicate that to you. It doesn't mean that you're saying that it's your fault, but what you're saying is the one thing you can communicate clearly is how you feel, what's going on between you all is impacting you and how it makes you feel. The third thing is you want to listen actively. That's part of that feminine receptive energy. So, feminine energy is naturally receptive. It is. So, you want to practice active listening. Give your partner space to express himself. Don't interrupt, right? Sometimes we can get into a mode of, trying to set the record straight, trying to overly explain. And what happens with that, that's more of like a mother child type of communication where you're almost like nagging, right? And we all need to work on that if we do that with our kids, right? Um, but you want to get out of that mode of like um, putting somebody in their place, right? I need to tell you about yourself. Be in a mode of actively listening, being curious. If somebody says something that you feel doesn't capture, if they say, I don't, you do this, you do that, be curious and wonder, how they could come to that conclusion. Is there some truth to it? Is there some accuracy? Is there a way that you're coming across that you don't intend to, but that's how they receive it, right? So be active in your listening and curious. I'll add curious to that. The fourth thing is stay open and receptive. So you're actively listening, and it takes work. Continuing to breathe, avoiding the defensiveness. That's a lot of times where the self talk comes in. Remember, I said with the story earlier, I was talking to myself like, okay, you're not going to take this personally. You're not going to take this personally. Okay. That means that you are using your thoughts to help calm or center your emotions. Stay open to hearing their perspective, even if it's difficult, even if it doesn't paint you in the best light. Part of being in a relationship is the other person can see you in ways that you might not see yourself, and that even people who see you, who know you in a more superficial way, may not see. right? You may be the bee's knees to everybody else, but that person that you're with 24/7, or that you're always, that you're building a relationship with, they may see parts of yourself that it's hard for you to either see or acknowledge. We all have a shadow side. We all have a darker side. And part of being committed with someone is you allow them to see that, or they just naturally see it. And so you want to be able to consider their perspective, consider what they're saying. And this is also where that P2 formula that I talked about, that I use with my coaching clients and in my coaching programs, it's the one P is not taking it personally. The other is being playful, right? Not always taking everything so seriously or being so intense with it. This can be helpful in a disagreement or in conflict. It doesn't mean that you are inappropriate and you just start laughing, but you can lighten the mood a bit, right? You could say, "All right, babe, like I see this is important. Let me shut my mouth. Let me listen to you," right? You can add a bit of playfulness to it, or outside of the conflict, you can add a more playful way of interacting with each other that is not so intense all the time. And what that does is it calms, that's a way of both of you all calming each other. We react with our nervous systems to our spouse's nervous system. So when there's tension in the air, like our nervous systems stay on the defense. When there is a lighter mood, a more playfulness, a more willingness to say, okay, I'm going to choose the road of a little less intensity so that it's not always like keeping us both on the defense, that can be really powerful. When we get deep into this, it's really it's so intricate, right? There's so many signals of communication. There's such communication between what's going on in our bodies, our thoughts, how they make us feel, and ultimately how we behave. And so if we can learn to control what's going on within ourselves, we can also model that within the conflict with our spouse. That is one of the powerful things about feminine communication. It's very sophisticated, I will tell you. Like when you're in peak feminine communication, peak graceful communication, it is very, very sophisticated because you have a level of emotional intelligence that allows you to understand like these different dynamics. So the P2 formula is not taking it personally, being intentional about that, and knowing when to add a more playful mood to bring down the intensity. The fifth thing is setting boundaries respectfully. Now, not all conflicts go in this perfect way, right? Sometimes you will be with someone who has anger management problems, who himself saw toxic communication or was exposed to toxic things about how you should, you know, they don't know the difference between masculinity outside the home or outside the relationship and inside. They need to learn to soften their tone, right? So it's you need to be okay with setting boundaries. First of all, yes, physical abuse should never be part of the equation. I think that should go without saying, right? You remove yourself from that. That is not a time to engage or try to calm somebody else down, right? It has taken a turn at that point. But things like verbal abuse, emotional abuse, being called names, right? Those that should be a sign that I'm not going to engage right now. I'm walking away from this. And it should be made clear that that is not acceptable to you, right? So boundaries are important. There has to be parameters within which the communication takes place. You should not be threatened. You should not be put in harm's way. You should not be targeted. The same, it goes both ways though. You can't threaten your spouse. You should not use verbal abuse. Sometimes I see women do this where it's like they call names, they throw things, they threaten to hit, or they threaten to get somebody, a male family member to come handle that person. At this point, the conflict has taken such a turn that you need to walk away, right? If you're calling someone a name, well, if you're being called a name, right? If you're being threatened, you need to remove yourself. But if you find yourself using, cursing, calling names, throwing things, threatening to hit, threatening to get this person hurt, it has gone to a level that you need to remove yourself. Professional help is needed at that point because you both cannot manage the emotions. There's too much reactivity, right? So be mindful of the parameters. There shouldn't be abuse, there shouldn't be threats, there shouldn't be harm taking place. All right, so those boundaries are really, really important. Now, I always like to talk about the research. I did mention that one statistic with the Gottman's research, big relationship researchers, John and Julie Gottman, 69% of conflicts in long term relationships are just intractable. They are what they are, they don't just get resolved. So don't put this pressure on yourself that you all have to constantly be talking and explaining yourself. Some things you have to let be. I saw this great interview with the two of them, the couple, John and Julie Gottman, where Julie was like, they grew up differently. Like her husband grew up in Brooklyn, New York, a family of immigrants and refugees. They lived in this really small apartment, overcrowded. So John, her husband, got used to just being able to tune out things around him. He could be just engrossed in his books and whatever it is, and like tune out noise and therefore people around him. He also would get so engrossed in his work that he would be very messy, right? Julie, on the other hand, his wife, was grew up in a much more organized household, as she says. It wasn't overcrowded. It wasn't overstimulating. She was used to being very neat and organized. And so when they got together, and it's still an issue, right? Sometimes he can get so engrossed in his work where he completely is not connected. She feels shut out. And it's not a personal thing, it's his coping style. Also, he would be very, very messy. And she's like, oh my God, this is driving me crazy. So they would have a signal for when she was like, this is getting to a point like, John, you time to pause. First of all, your mess is coming to my side of the room. You need to reorganize everything. They had a talk about like when would be the signal that he would need to get things more cleaned up. The other thing is, she let him know that when you go into that coping mode of just focusing on your work, you can shut me out. It makes me feel like I'm not seen, I'm not heard. It makes me feel unimportant. And so they had communication about that. Now, did that completely change who he was? Did he become this neat freak that's always organized, or was he just always connected? No, but they reached a way to signal to each other. She said it would be almost like every 3 to 4 weeks where it's like, all right, John, you got to clean up. This place is a mess, right? You got to come back and get reorganized. Or she was able to signal like, you're going into that place where I'm feeling disconnected. Like I need you to pause, or we need to take some time to reconnect. Okay. So it's not that the issue completely disappeared, but they have found a way to work around it. So a lot of the other research is just that, tons and tons of studies show that couples who resolve conflicts with empathy, respect, and emotional regulation. Empathy, respect, and emotional regulation. I'll call it ERER, right? Empathy, respect, and emotional regulation. They are more likely to have long lasting, fulfilling relationships. All right. When both partners learn to express their feelings calmly and listen to each other, it builds more trust and intimacy. The more you feel like you can say what you have to say without the other person overreacting, the more you're going to say what you have to say, right? In contrast, couples who approach conflict with anger, criticism, defensiveness, contempt, They have more dissatisfaction. These are the people that you see everybody talking about, like, why is everybody that I know who's married miserable? No, everyone who's married is not miserable, but there are people who don't know how to communicate that are miserable. They're dissatisfied. They don't know how to regulate their emotions. Their partner doesn't know how to regulate theirs. And then they come together and they clash, and it's too explosive. So, when you learn to embrace your feminine communication style, that calmness, that empathy, focus on connection and emotional regulation, this can actually enhance your relationship. And it also just enhances how you are. It enhances you as a woman and how you move in the world. Once I learned this, it just impacted everything, right? I saw a news story recently about, it was a tragic story. A woman was shot like after being in an argument with someone at a convenience store. And we've seen stories, you could turn on the news anytime and see stories like this. And I thought to myself, not to at all blame the person who was shot, but it's like, I will do any and everything to avoid an argument with an unknown entity, right? There's no stranger, no person. Like, you want the parking space, take it. You were in line first, you feel like I cut in front of you, you know what? Go ahead, right? I do not see the wisdom at all in arguing with strangers or unknown entities, because you have no clue about their state of mind, their ability to regulate their emotions, and how reactive they're going to be. So once you master this feminine communication, it just affects how you move in the world. All right, so here's some other tips, like really, 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 I'm going to just get into the weeds of it, really practical tips. One is pause before reacting. So these four key tips. Pause before reacting. It's that breath, calm, the power of the pause, the pregnant pause. Pause and count to 10. 1, 2, 3. You can still look at the person. You can still show that you're present, you're connected, right? It's better to just take a moment to collect yourself, even if the other person is like, well, what's going on, right? Just pause and ground yourself. 2 is speak with I statements. I. It doesn't sound accusatory. It takes ownership. It allows you to recenter on yourself so that you can be in a place to actively listen to your partner. The third thing is avoid escalation. When the conversation gets heated, again, the best thing you can do sometimes is to stop talking. Stop going toe to toe, stop doing tit for tat, right? I use this. This is something that you can also use when you start you're raising a teenager, right? You have to be the bigger person. Stop going tit for tat. Focus on de-escalating by lowering your voice tone, softening your tone. You could say something like, I want us to talk about this calmly because I care about our relationship. I'm not trying to attack you, right? Like, you have to use phrases and tones and even body language that says, hey, this is not a threatening situation. If you think about it, when we tend to get in conflict, we are we get very primal. We get back to our primal instincts of protection. And that's where the lashing out comes in, and, being defensive. So use your tone, your body language, and your phrases to communicate that let's de escalate this. Also, think big picture. Use this conflict to create connection. It's a chance to strengthen your emotional intimacy. Focus on those feelings, showing that vulnerability, knowing that the payoff may not be in this particular argument or disagreement, but later on down the line in terms of how you conducted yourself, how you show that, again, you are not overly defensive. You are in a place where you can hear, where you can receive, and where you can respect the other person's point of view, even if it's not what you wanted to hear yourself. That is such a powerful tool for relationship communication. So those are the four tips for how to navigate conflict with your feminine communication. So I did get a question that somebody sent to me. Okay. What should I do if my partner tends to get aggressive during arguments? Yeah, this is common, right? Aggression is the quickest way or the easiest way sometimes to react to disagreement. And it becomes like an instinct. It becomes a go-to that sometimes was modeled for us, and sometimes it can bring instant gratification. So, part of handling conflicts with grace is foregoing instant gratification. You have to learn to delay gratification. Sometimes you just want to tell that person off. You want to just, give it to them. Tell your spouse like everything that they have done that got on your nerves, bring up every past incident, and you feel gratified, but it's not helpful. So a lot of times aggression is that instant go-to instinct and gratification. And you have to see it as that. The best thing you can do is not match energy. Say this with me, ladies. We are not matching energy when it comes to aggression. The best approach is to remain calm and set clear boundaries on how you expect to be treated. Be willing to walk away, to remove yourself from the situation. You can say something like, I won't engage in this conversation if it continues to be disrespectful. I won't accept you being aggressive with me. I don't feel safe when you're aggressive with me, right? Then you can revisit it when you're both calmer, and you can check in. When is a good time, for us to talk about this? Like at a later time, you can say, is now a good time for us to revisit that issue? Can we set some ground rules, right? The key is you have to be in a place of being in control of your emotions. You don't want to match aggressive energy with aggressive energy, especially masculine and feminine is two different energies. And so, masculine energy, when it's in its aggressive space, especially if it's in that kind of outside protective mode of aggressive energy, that is not conducive to relationship communication or relationship conflict. The best thing to do is to communicate that you're not willing to engage, but to stay calm, okay? And again, if it's a bigger issue, you need professional help. That person may need anger management. You may need anger management. I'm not going to, I'm not one of these people that will tell you that just because there has been one intense argument or you all have been in a pattern of having intensive arguments that you need to leave the relationship. I don't know all the details, but what I will say is you need to get help with that. If you both are in a space of not being able to control your emotions, you have to get help. That has to be resolved before you can move forward with it. All right. So remember that it's the delay of gratification. When we are in our space of regulating our emotions, we're letting go of the immediate satisfaction of being aggressive, being mad, telling somebody off, being toxic. All of those things, they just get the feelings off of us in the moment, but they don't necessarily help in the long term. All right. So I hope these tips were helpful to you in this framework around, the P2 formula, being learning not to take it personally and learning when to be playful, when to bring down the intensity. And this is a key set of skills that I teach in my coaching program, the Boundaries to Bliss Society. It's my inner circle membership where we have like-minded women who want to experience fulfilling healthy relationships, who want to tap into their feminine energy, and who also want to be able to live out healthy boundaries. So it's the Boundaries to Bliss Society. You can see the link in the show notes. Also, my book, if you just want to start with reading, The Boundaries to Bliss Blueprint for Women who are finally ready to win at love, is my book that goes into the power of boundaries, the power of self-love, and how to balance communication in your relationship. All right. So I cannot wait to see you all in the next episode. Remember, keep shining, tap into your feminine essence. And when it comes to communication, understand the power of graceful feminine communication. I'll see you next time. I'm Dr. Nicole.